In Berserk, there are numerous amounts of iconic panels, but which one reigns true the story the most? Which one's the most important? I asked my community what they thought was that panel, and there are many differing opinions. But there is one panel that I feel like is the most important to the story, but it's one that no one ever talks about. Let's get into it. So when I posted, I had over 150 people comment what they thought was a panel that they felt like really represented the story as a whole. And it was more just to get an opinion, right? These are all opinions and these are all things that people feel like evoke the most. And there are a lot of people who said the same thing. In terms of the panel I'll be talking about, only 2 people named this panel, to which I think also evokes my point, it never gets talked about. One of the most common panels that everyone felt like really emphasized what the story of Berserk is was actually the staircase scene in the Golden Age. It's the scene where Griffith is telling Princess Charlotte what it means for him to actually have a friend, and Guts standing there and realizing that they're not on equal footing as much as he might think when he felt like they were friends. Now, this is an extremely important panel. It very much summarizes the relationship between the 2 characters, at least in that point in time, and means a lot for the story as it later transpires into other bits, because that kind of dynamic reverts back to that. We have moments of Guts being compared to the castle in Griffith's mind, but then reverts backwards again to Guts being the black swordsman chasing after Femto and him being on that same higher angle. It's a pretty good panel, and it's an amazing panel, and I would say is a very good one that represents the story. Another one that was extremely common was one that involved Griffith, but less so. It's when Griffith is reborn in his physical form at the end of the Conviction arc. The panel isn't him being reborn, it's the panel of Guts going into his rage mode, going to go and attack him. But it's the series of panels that stop him because of when he remembers that Casca is right behind him. A lot of people feel like this represents the story the most because it's all about Guts trying to control the rage inside him and trying to understand that there are things staying for and living for and fighting for than the urge for revenge. This is, again, a really great panel, and it's probably one of the most unique panels in the fact that it's not a double-page spread, it's a series of panels that in one culmination creates this perfect iconic image of motion. And it really emphasizes the story so much more using the black and white and implying how important Casca is to the story and to Guts, our character. A lot of people went even further back, talking about early Black Swordsman panels when Guts sheds his first tear to, I guess, the reader. And to Puck, it's something that evokes how Guts has this overlying facade of what it is that of this inhuman monster, when deep down he's just as human as the rest of us. Which, again, another great one. There's the one of Guts and Casca as they fall in love, the eclipse of Guts raging and going into berserk mode. Another one is when Guts decides to revoke the idea of revenge and never lose Casca ever again and always protect her. There are countless, and I could spend this entire time reading through every single one, but the one that I want to talk about is one that people should know, will have seen, will have read, and maybe don't just remember as much. At the beginning of certain chapters in the story, primarily early on in the Berserk story, there are these double-page spreads that happen at the beginning of certain arcs that take place in the story. One of them is, of course, with the Devil Hand and the Balet. That's not the panel I'm talking about. That one specifically talks about fate. Can man escape his own fate, or is it predestined? And that is very much important to the story of Berserk, no doubt. It is one of the defining factors and themes of the story in struggling against fate, in struggling against the way the world wishes for you to live, the way in which the world is twisting your story to its own ends. And that is Guts in his own way. He is a cog in a machine that is turning the opposite way, changing things around him as he moves forward. But it's not that one I want to talk about. And congrats to the 2 people or more that guessed in the community post, because the panel that I think is one of the most underrated panels that no one talks about. And I'll tell you now, it's not a landscape shot. It's not Miura's best, most well-drawn piece of art. It's not anything from Millennium Falcon. It's not anything from any digital era. It is honestly not even the most detailed panel of his entire catalog. But to me, this panel probably, if I had to say in my opinion, evokes the themes and story of Berserk more so than nearly any panel, not only visually, but dialogue-wise. Because this panel has those 2 together, a perfect mix of imagery and dialogue. And I think that's what makes this panel so amazing. If you haven't guessed it already, it is the Wind of Swords opening page panel. it's just a simple double-page spread of assuming Guts holding up the Dragon Slayer to the sky, and you have 2 pieces of text, which people like to shit on manga for having not that great a dialogue, even just anime in general. But I have to say it, this panel is poetry in general of how it is written. It is just so amazing and beautiful in the way it says it. Anyone can read this and really evoke the emotion that's coming behind it because the words are so perfectly well written already. And if you bear with me, I'm going to do my best to read it for you now. Man takes up the sword in order to shield the small wound in his heart, sustained in a far-off time beyond remembrance. Man wields the sword so that he may die smiling in some far-off time beyond perception. Oh, dude. Bro, how does he do that? It's so fucking good. It's so fucking good. There are so many great lines spoken by characters in the story, but this panel like just gets me every single time. It doesn't only evoke the story, but brings out what's best in the story of Berserk, which you can apply, like many great stories, to your own life. Taking up the sword doesn't have to literally mean be taking up the sword. It can be figurative. It can be figurative to you. It could be applicable. Take up the sword in order to shield the small wound in his heart in some far off time beyond remembrance. That means at whatever time in your life, whether it be in the present, the past, or the future, and in some time that is either 10 years from now, 100 years from now, man picks up the sword to shield the small wound in his heart, implying that every human on this planet has something inside them that they want to protect, a wound in them that they can't really keep healed. And it's something that every human has, every character has in the story. Every character is trying to shield themselves from something that may hurt them, either physically or emotionally. And this is so applicable to us as people and to the characters in the story of taking up the sword and trying to protect it. And of course, visually showing literally taking up the sword is almost inspirational, but very melancholy, to which I think it perfectly echoes again to Guts' theme, especially if you look at this and think of that, you know, it hits a bit more hard. The second piece of text, man wields the sword that say he may die smiling in some far off time beyond perception. Many people feel like, well, who wants to wield the sword so that it may die smiling? It's essentially meaning doing what you love. Again, another thing that is great about the story of Berserk, and that even Guts in his Black Swordsman terrible emo era was able to convey. Talking about how he died doing what he loved, I'm sure he was happy. And that's something that I think Mir himself, if I may speak so boldly, probably felt when he passed away. He died doing what he loved in a very tragic way. And I think that's what is great, is that these are very true words to live by. Wield the sword so that you may die smiling. Doing something that you feel was something that made you whole again. And the first piece of text, if you had to encapsulate it, is the idea of moving on and struggling and living through life and taking with you the blows and shielding the wound in your heart, and again, doing it with others. The second part is a more personal one of chasing the dream that you need. You need a dream to live by. You need a code, something to live by that you have that trumps everything else in your life so that you can pursue it. So that when you do die, when that wound in your heart does hit and it doesn't heal and you do end up passing, at least you can die with a smile on your face, which I gotta say is a small percentage of people in their life that are able to do that. Wind of Swords as a chapter in a whole, it's not my favorite chapter of all time, but this panel itself made me feel like the story I was about to read was something more than just a dark fantasy, edgy Nietzsche kind of story. It was something more. It could have a bit more depth to it. And again, this is extremely pretentious. Just fronting up. This is probably the most pretentious video I'll ever make. Maybe. But it's something that I think was really interesting to talk about because I never see anyone talk about this panel. I never see this panel in any kind of way that is shared so far across the community. I'm not saying that people don't like it. People would look at it and be like, yo, go to panel. But I feel like it never really got the discussion it needed. It never really got the thing that made it so much more interesting. This panel came out in volume 5 in 1992. That is so long ago. This panel came out before I was born. I'm aging myself, but it came out before I was born. And this essentially even hits harder, more so now than ever. It's just so good. And I think that this panel stands the test of time. And not only visually, it still looks amazing. And Mira-san's other panels, even the Black Swordsman, do hold up, but you can tell its age, you can date it. This panel, I feel like you can't date. It feels like it could have been in any arc. It feels like it could have been placed anywhere in the story, and it would have reigned still true. I really do think that this is one of the reasons why it's an underrated panel, is that it's good words to live by. It really is. And it's an amazing visual one. It's striking, it hits hard to you. It could be put, again, somewhere in a gallery, and we wouldn't even know who made it, but it really has something that says a lot to us. The chapter itself doesn't primarily adhere so much as to what it is the panel's saying. It's more about Griffith being knighted by the King of Midland, Casca and Guts fighting over how they operate, and Guts realizing that he does care about the Hawks, but he doesn't care so much for the dream that Griffith is trying to vie because he's still training in the courtyard. And it does imply the beginning of Guts's evolution to realize he does care about these people, but what am I living for besides just to live? And that's where the beginning of his dream starts to take place, and he's still shielding that wound. I just really wanted to talk about this panel. I was skimming through my volumes like a month ago, and I thought, why does no one ever talk about this one? And there probably are, but I really wanted to talk about it myself and give you this whole spiel of what I feel and what it does. And if you have the time, maybe figure out what it means to you. I think I'd really like to hear that in the comments. That's all from me, guys. Thank you for listening to me rant about this one panel. And if you enjoy the video, please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. That's all from me, guys. Thank you again for watching to the end. My name's Mugen. As always, have a good one.